It is my great pleasure to invite Gigi to be my guest speaker today. Yeah, it'd be great if Gigi can introduce yourself a little bit. I think you have lots of titles. I haven't get very familiar with like writer, author. Yeah, lots of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do have a lot of titles. A lot of people like to refer to me by different things: the sock whisperer, the sock godfather, or the sock moaner. I like to just say that I'm the town crier of security operations. I think that's the more befitting for me. But my official title is I'm a global security operations lead for Marks and Spencers. So it's a big retail company. Great food. I love the food. Love the discount on the food. As you can see, I've taken that discount to heart recently with all the food that I've been eating. But yeah, really enjoying it so far. I also do a lot of kind of auxiliary work around security operations. So looking at how I can improve security operations. I'm currently building an effective analyst framework at the moment. So how people can come into the industry and become effective analysts. And I've actually got an article coming out soon about what the hell effective actually means to people. Because I throw that word around a lot. What is effective? So there's going to be an article coming out soon explaining what effective actually means and how to kind of utilize that in your career and get paid more money. So that's going to be coming out soon as well. There's lots of stuff that I do, and we're going to dig into some of it today, I believe.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds great. Somehow I feel like you're a university lecturer or professor instead of a real socklet.
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of presentations, and people do say that I do come across fairly academic in relation to how I kind of present stuff. I do try to add some humor, but I've not been known to be a stand-up comic, so my comedic skills are very lacking in that sense. But yeah, I do try to not come across too serious, but I do try to make it relatable as well.
That is awesome. Well, by the way, relate to SOC. I think I just got a security alert from Evernote when I opened it. It's kept popping out. I couldn't stop it until like 2 minutes ago. Finally, it stopped by himself. Just, it just came out from nowhere. Security alerts. That's good things. I think if I could ask no more about cybersecurity or SOC, that won't be a big problem for me. Yeah. So I have tons of questions after your articles, and I know you've been interviewed by InfoSec, lots of cybersecurity community as well. My question might not be that technical because I'm not living in SOC world, not SOC visit. So my first question is related to people's career. If the candidates didn't have the certifications that the GD required, related to like SOC qualification or something, how would you identify if the candidate is qualified for this role?
So that's a really, really good question. Now, the normal premise is what qualifications do they have in relation to the job description? So there might be stuff like Security Plus, or there might be stuff like CISP or something like that. They're going to have some sort of certification as a kind of benchmark of their perceived knowledge. It's a perception of the knowledge that they may have or they may have attained during their studies. So it's a point and mark measurement of what they may have. However, for me, when it comes to security operations, because it's quite a focused element of security, it's very difficult to say they have the possessed knowledge to perform in the role because they have this certification or they've done this course, and it's very difficult to say that they've taken it seriously. Now, the problem with a lot of certifications is they're multiple choice, right? It's all about remembering, and they don't actually test you that great anyway. I hate multiple choice questions. So for me, it's very hard to understand whether that person has purely remembered the answer or rather they know the answer. So it's very difficult to attest that. So what I tend to do is I look at their LinkedIn profiles. I look at what they have done and how they are speaking about things. I also like to generally just have a discussion with them. So if I open up a role and somebody's applied for it and I like the looks of their CV, I'm not going to take their CV for granted. I'm going to go speak to them. I'm going to try to understand what do they think security operations is, what do they do, what have they studied, what have they done in their spare time. So have they done any projects? Have they done any home labs? Have they done any malware analysis? Have they done any kind of instant response in making a kind of an attack and defend lab? Have they responded to a fake incident that they've created? And if so, can they talk me through it? So for me, it's not about the qualifications as such. It's about what do they have up here? Because at the end of the day, anybody can pass certifications. They're incredibly easy to pass, but it doesn't really test anybody's knowledge. They don't say to them, right, okay, what can you do? Not what can you remember, what can you do? So one of the things that I like to do, especially when we go to like the interview stages, is I like to ask scenarios. I like to present them with scenarios because I want to see how they think. Do they think very kind of in a linear kind of fashion, or do they think outside the box? Do they talk about things a little bit differently? So one of the questions that I like to ask, I don't ask it anymore, so I'm not giving away any kind of interview tips here, so I don't ask it anymore. So this isn't the cheat, but how would you secure this server? Now everybody's going to say, well, I'll just patch it. I will just make sure that it's got endpoint protection on. I said, well, okay, right. So what if somebody breaks into the building and steals that server? Have you protected it then? So I like to see if they think outside the box. They don't think purely about the technical measures. They're actually able to think about the physical security, the kind of the humidity, the temperature around it, making sure that it's available because of the temperature from the HVAC systems, keeping it nice and cool. I want to make sure that they can look at the authentication, they can look at the software installed in it, they can look at the network protocols using it, and they can look at the very environment which it resides in. That for me is thinking outside the box. So to go back to your question, I don't think qualifications are really a great measure of somebody's ability to perform a role or to think on how they perform in a role. I think what we need to do is come up with better ways to assess talent. And I think that that's not going to be done until we change the way that we interview. One of the best interview scenarios that I've ever been involved with was there was a company called CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike have a lab that they put you in. They put you in the lab and they give you a scenario, and you've got to go and do that scenario. You've got to get hands on the keyboard, you've got to solve the problem, and then you've got to submit your score. And while you're doing this, they're tracking absolutely everything that you're doing. So you can't go ahead and, start brute forcing your way, because they're going to detect that you're copy and pasting answers in again and again and again. So for me, that is a great test. There's also kind of psychometric kind of tests where they ask you different scenarios and see how you think. I like that one better. But I think we need to move away from these traditional multiple choice pub questions, these pub quizzes that people seem to take as these industry best certifications. They are not.
Yeah, I can stand that. That makes perfect sense to me, because for lots of hiring managers, they would just use certifications, qualifications to screen out people, then move to the next stage. But lots of people actually couldn't get any interviews lined up just because they couldn't get qualifications. But some people will say, I have studied and understood the content related to certificates, but I haven't taken exams yet. In that case, if you put on the CV, hopefully it won't be screened out, because at least get one more chance to get interview.
Yeah.
Have you interviewed any candidates who have the certificates as JD required, but couldn't answer relevant questions very well?
I would say that's probably around 80% of the people that I've interviewed.
Yeah,
I would say that there's a high amount of overly qualified people on paper who are at that junior level, entry level, that don't possess the knowledge to be able to answer questions on the spot. Now, some people may say to me, and it's a very valid concern, that our job isn't about remembering stuff and be able to answer it on the spot. Well, again, there is a double-edged sword here. While we do have the likes of Google to our hand, you can't always bring Google into a meeting. You are there to be a professional for that very reason. Now, imagine a scenario where you go to a brain surgeon. You can't get a brain surgeon going on YouTube looking at videos on how to do stuff. They have a level of knowledge to be able to perform the role. Now, I'm not saying there's parallels between cybersecurity and brain surgery, but you get the picture. You've got to have a certain level of knowledge to be able to perform that role. So when asked questions about scenarios, they should be able to answer it. Now, the way that I look at it is, you could have all of your tools taken away, and if you could still answer the questions and perform on the job kind of hands-on keyboard stuff, you're a good analyst.
Yeah.
If not, you're just a button pusher, which unfortunately that's what many people are becoming, is because all they want to do is pass as many certifications as possible and get a job as fast as possible. And I understand they want to get in the industry and make money, but the problem is that they're being outperformed by people that take their studying seriously, and they can answer very abstract questions in a way that is not only effective, but portrays their knowledge to the people that they're interviewing for or to.
That is very abstract. I try to understand some theoretical SOC questions, just so challenging for me. I've been reading some of the articles, and one of the questions, like regarding the question you listed, underneath assessing certifications, some of the questions might be challenging for newcomers to get the right answer. what else should they do to evaluate whether the answers suit their situation or not?
So let me kind of ask a question just to understand the question itself. You want to understand whether they're a valid candidate for the role?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it kind of goes back a little bit to the previous question where you're trying to understand somebody's ability and their capabilities. They're two different words, ability and capability. So capability is what you potentially could do, and ability is what you can do. So at that stage, you can't really prove somebody's ability. So you can't really say you can do this. So what you're trying to do is assess their capability, their ability to do something. So what you need to do is, and the way that I like to do it is frame questions around assessing the capability as it's appropriate to the role that you're trying to hire for. So for example, if I'm trying to hire for a security operations role, I need to make sure that my scenarios are appropriate to what I'm trying to hire for. So I would ask incident response questions, malware analysis questions, questions about securing infrastructure or identifying security incidents. I'm going to ask questions around that because that's appropriate. What I do find, and I'm going to be on the side of candidates now, I do find a lot of security operation managers like to ask questions that are no way appropriate to the role that they're trying to hire for. So they ask questions about database security. I'm sorry, but we're not database security specialists. We may monitor databases and may monitor for SQL injection attacks, but we don't go ahead and secure those databases. We might secure the infrastructure that those databases are on, but it's not our responsibility. That belongs to another team. So they're kind of abstract questions, and they get asked often. So assessing the validity of a candidate is all about gauging their capability as it relates to the role that you're trying to hire for. So the questions need to be appropriate, and there also needs to be an accurate measure of their capability. Now, the problem arises is a lot of the stuff that we do at the analyst level, at the engineer level, is hands-on keyboard stuff. And it's very difficult to assess the capability of somebody if you're just asking questions because it's a verbal exchange.
Yeah.
So you're trying to understand how they think. You're trying to understand the level of which they think, because the level of their ability to think could potentially relate to their ability to level to do. So if they can think well, there's that perception that they could do well, but there becomes that snake oil salesman scenario where they are able to sell you themselves very, very good, but the product that you're buying isn't actually that great. So they might say to you, hey, take this hair gel, it's going to make you not ginger for 24 hours. And I pull it in for 30 minutes and I'm back to being ginger. That for me is the kind of snake oil salesman, but those kind of scenarios, they do happen. People are very good talkers. They're able to sell themselves, but they aren't the best product. So assessing the ability of the candidate in relation to the resources that you have at an organizational level is very, very difficult, because you need to be able to do it over 1 or 2 interviews or maybe 3 interviews. And that is not a lot of time. You only get about an hour to 2 hours with the candidate to be able to assess them. So for me, I'm an advocate for more throwing them into a lab environment and monitoring how well they do. I'm all of an advocate for that, especially at that engineering level.
Well, it sounds so complicated to ask students if the candidate could fit this role. It requires lots of systematic process.
Yeah.
To finish. Yeah. I just got a comment from Joe. Well, it's a really nice one. Are you really a subject matter expert without Google or ChatGPT? It must be related to the things we just talked about. Like some people use Google to do any search during the job, but during the meeting, we couldn't allow them to do that.
So I like to answer this question. Well, imagine if you were thrown into a room with your senior manager and you didn't have your laptop there. If you can answer his questions, you're a professional. If you can't, you're a charlatan. It's as simple as that. Now, too many people are relying on Google and the likes of ChatGPT to be a replacement for general knowledge. Now, I'm in the viewpoint that technology should augment our knowledge, not replace our knowledge. But it's coming to this scenario now where people are using it as the pinnacle of all knowledge. It's the all-seeing, all-truthful eye of knowledge. So what they would do is they would use that as their kind of way of saying, hey, you know, it's definitely true because ChatGPT has said it's true. And it said, well, actually, if you're a professional, you'll be able to understand the business problem, understand your current tactical problems, and understand that that answer is actually utter tripe. It doesn't relate to the business in any way, shape, or form. There is just no appropriate kind of translation between what ChatGPT would put out in relation to the problems that the business is having. I can't say to ChatGPT, hey, we are currently struggling with our alert volume. How would you solve it? It's just going to give me a list of what I could do. And if I don't know that, why the hell am I a lead? Why the hell am I a manager? Why the hell have I been employed to do something? It's like, that's just telling me how to do my job. If I need that, I should not be in that position. That for me is professional incompetence.
That sounds desperate. So I just need to pay £30 or £50 for ChatGPT subscription. Just stock analyst, but yeah, in the end, it's going to be very desperate. One of the articles also mentioned the pragmatic approach for newcomers who want to study cybersecurity. Whose advice should the newcomers possibly listen to so they could at least avoid damaging their careers?
So I'm actually going to release an article tomorrow that's actually going to talk about something that is damaging people's careers at an early onset, and it's all about the effective nature of an analyst. And it could also be expanded to an effective nature of any job on the planet. And it's all about understanding the problem that you're trying to solve and your reason for existence. The way that I put it is, if you don't understand why you're getting paid every month, should you really be employed by that business? And I ask, when I do mentoring calls, and when I used to do mentoring calls, one of the questions I ask is, why do you exist in the business that you're in? Why are you even there? And they would give me some wishy-washy answer saying, oh, I'm there to detect and respond to security incidents. It's like, well, okay, that's the absolute basic of your job. And you can say that about any kind of role that you're in with security operations, but why does security operations relate to the business that you're in? And they can't answer that. And that for me is a big problem. If you can't answer to why you're even in that business in the first place, then to me, that is a big problem. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are probably going to be screaming at the screen going, hey, but they're there to detect and respond. Yes, at the absolute fundamental basic level, they're there to detect and respond. But they're also there to protect something. They are there to protect the business's ability to generate revenue. That's basic as well. They need to look at what are the objectives and goals of the organization. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to go to senior management and say, hey, what's your problems? What keeps you up at night? What do you need to solve? What are you asked to report on? That's alignment. That for me is understanding the problem beyond just going detect and respond, because anybody can find that in Security Plus. Now, anybody can find that in CIS, but the absolute basic of security. It's all about aligning yourself to the problems in which the business is currently experiencing, because that's the reason you're employed, to solve those problems and help them on their journey to future success of the business, not just detect and respond, because that's what the tools do. And as far as I know, humans aren't exactly tools. Humans are this complex organism able to think in very abstract ways. I'm here to help manage risk and save the company money. Yeah, but then I would also say that we don't actually manage risk at our level. I mean, if you manage risk at the very basic level of security operations, then I would say that your business is failing from an information security perspective. Because if you're managing risk, then for me, it's like, well, who the hell what are those guys doing? They manage the risk. We just identify the threats. We identify the vulnerabilities. They're the guys up there. They do all the hard stuff and the calculations. We do the easy stuff by just going, hey, we're seeing all these problems. Do you know about it? And they're going, yeah, we know about it. Cool. Yeah, don't worry about it. You just keep doing your SOC stuff. We'll do the risk management stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you keep doing your risk management stuff. I'll keep watching the towers. But the core essence of it is do you know your problems of your managers? Do you know what they have to report on? Because businesses are hierarchical, right? You have the manager, you have their subordinates or their analysts, their employees, whatever you want to call them. Subordinates is probably not a great term, but you have their kind of the manager, the senior manager, the manager, and the team underneath them. The senior manager is going to report to maybe executive management. They're going to have particular requirements that they need to meet. So they need to show that executive management that they're doing this. And then senior manager would go to the manager saying, hey, I need you to do this. And then the manager would go to the analyst and say, hey, I need you to do this. But I think what's really valuable is if the senior manager and the manager talk to each other and translate that into one big organizational functional goal to say, as a function, this is what we need to achieve. Okay, and individually, you'll be assigned tasks that relate to these objectives or relate to these goals that you need to achieve. That to me is alignment. That's beyond detect and respond. That gives you reason for existence. And knowing that is going to get you paid a lot more than you think.
Oh, that's very complex. It seems that this person who need to speak plain English and interpret technical knowledge, technical things into non-technical stuff, and that each stakeholder understand what happened there and how we're going to resolve the issues and prevent issues immediately.
That's a really good point. And I think that security operations, from a technical perspective, the technology talk should be left at the absolute minimal tactical level. It should not ever supersede that level. If you start talking technical, even if you talk to your manager and are too technical, I think that is a failure to communicate. I think you should be able to translate that into something that matters. Impact to the business, impact to a service, impact to a product, stuff like that. We need to talk about that, not, oh, it's malware. Nobody cares at that stage. Only people care if they're going to lose money. That's all they care about at that stage. If you start talking to people that it's some super duper hackers from China, they don't care. Or some super duper like malware that's been created by the best coders in the world. They don't care about that. They really don't care. The only thing that they care about at that stage is, can they carry on making money? That's all they care about. And
Yeah.
they don't care about the technicalities. They don't care about IP addresses. They don't care about bits and bytes. They don't care about the strain of malware or who made it. The only thing that they care about is, can they stop it? Can it be stopped? And will it happen again? That's all they care about. And if you can't talk to them at that level, then they're not going to want to know you. They will want to get somebody above you to talk to. And that is how you get promoted, is if you talk plain business English. Nobody cares about this super duper hacker stuff. Nobody cares about it.
Wow.
Like they go, oh, it's a penetration tester. He's got into our systems. So how are we going to stop it?
No.
And the problem is people make cybersecurity too technical than it actually is.
Right. Oh, so there's another question. What if I need certain assistive technologies based on AI in order to work in cybersecurity because of a disability?
That's a good one. I would throw out there to say, what disability? Because I'm dyslexic, I have dyscalculia, I'm dyspraxic, I've got Asperger's syndrome, and I've got Savant syndrome, all diagnosed. I've had them since I was a child. And for me, the only thing that I have that I need to help me in kind of reading, writing, and performing on the job is two different sets of colored glasses to help me see the screen properly. So I have these for days normally. These are my normal work glasses. And when I'm having really bad days, these are the only ones that kind of help me see and read better. So without these, typically on certain kind of in certain scenarios, I can't read properly. I won't be able to. I can read the sentence, I can read the words, but I don't make sense of it in my head. Blind.
Gosh, it sounds very tough.
So blind in cybersecurity. It depends on the level of blindness. Now, that's a very difficult question, because I would say that blind, deaf, yeah, you're painting a picture here. I would say it really depends on the role, because especially if you're working at a certain level where you've got to really do deep analysis into investigations, AI is only going to go so far for those kind of disabilities. It's not going to be able to do all of the work for you. There's going to be some elements where you need to kind of copy and paste stuff onto certain tools, and you need to kind of move stuff around. You need to be able to analyze it. It's going to be very difficult for AI to assist. It shouldn't, but it does. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is, especially in less mature security operations where the technology just isn't there. It becomes very difficult. You have to move this information from here. You have to kind of process information in different areas. You have to pull, remote onto different tools, or remote onto different networks, or remote onto different hosts, and pull information from there. And then you've got to collate the information together. Then you've got to try and pull a picture, and it becomes very, very difficult. Especially even for people with like learning difficulties, it becomes very, very difficult. I worked with a guy before that had dyscalculus quite bad. So he was really bad with numbers. And it got to the point where, he was using calculator all the time, all that kind of stuff. But he would pass stuff on. If it became too much, he would pass stuff on, which was fine. We'll take it over, we'll do it. And it was getting to the point where it was like, well, we need to do something more for him. We need to be able to maybe look out for kind of solutions on the market that can help him operate at that high level. I need to...
Yeah, there's definitely lots of health issues about doing different jobs. Well, actually, speaking of health, I have a question about mental health as well. One of the articles you mentioned, like 45% of cybersecurity professions are considering quitting the industry due to stress, which was quoted in your article, SOC Mental Health. Imagine if you were a minister in the UK and wanted to provide a bit of suggestions related to SOC mental health to the people who work for the public sector. As a SOC professions, what would you say?
So I would probably step out of the position of a minister at that point, because I'd realise that there is a lot of responsibility that people need to take for their own health. I noticed that a lot of people in security operations don't even look after themselves, and then they fall to mental health. And I think there is a duality to this response. People with dyscalculia and dyslexia use screenwriters. Yes, they do. And as somebody with both, I use these. So, but yeah, there's a duality to that response. There is a responsibility that people need to look after themselves. They need to treat themselves better. They need to be able to go for walks when they need to, turn off. They need to be able to take their breaks. They need to be able to eat a healthy diet. They need to be able to drink plenty of water. They need to be able to be active. But the problem is, a lot of people in technology, they just don't do those things. They get up out of their pit where they've been sleeping in, and they go straight to the desk with a cup of coffee. And then that's it. They work for the rest of the day, and then they go back to bed. They have no activity. They don't go outside. They don't get active. And then they blame the companies that they are burning out and they've got mental health. It's well, yes, the company sometimes is to blame, but there is a bit of element of responsibility that we need to take for ourselves. Now, we need to look after our own bodies. It's kind of like saying, my car's broken down, but I've never taken it for maintenance. This is your fault. I've broken down. There is an element of, well, some of it is your responsibility. Now, let's look at the side of businesses. So I've been in security operations where there has been so many alerts. There's been so many incidents to the point where most of them are false positives. Actually, the vast majority of them are false positives. I've been in one security operations center where there's so many alerts, and not even a single one of them was a true positive. It was just constantly just alert, closing down alerts all day. And it came to the stage where it was just too much. It was just too much to do. And they were like, well, that's just the way it is. I said, well, it's not just the way it is. If it could be better, it's as good as broke. And that's when I started to look at, well, if an organization has such high alert volumes, they need to have tuning processes. They need to have content lifecycle management processes. They need to be able to build tuning and analytical rules to drive down the numbers of false positives and help build better detection capabilities. And if they don't do that, then, well, they are to blame. And now, I will say that I've also suffered burnout in some stages where I have done everything I can to look after myself. I go to the gym an hour, 2 hours a day. I eat very well, all of that good stuff. And then when I go to the work, it's just the workload is just too high for me to be able to cope with it, to the point where I'm missing my breaks because I need to be able to do the work. And I completely understand that environment, but I made a decision to go find another job. I said, I can't sustain this. This is not healthy for me. I'm going to look for another job. So I got my CV done that night, started looking for other jobs. Within a couple of weeks, I found another job. And I just thought to myself, I couldn't do that. And I think if you get to that, it's all about self-awareness, right? You need to be aware of your own personal limits. You need to be aware of where that kind of that glass ceiling is. And you don't want to hit that glass ceiling. You don't want that to, never want to reach that. So you need to analyze what's going on. You need to think, right, okay, this is becoming too much for me. And I don't think I can sustain this. I need to talk to somebody. Either I talk to my manager or I go build my CV and find another job. And I think the first thing that you should do is talk to your manager and say, hey, there's a problem here, because management might not even be aware that it's a problem. And it goes back to that being able to communicate. If you can tell your management there's a problem, they might think, actually, okay, we now have a use case to go to senior management and ask for more budget to hire somebody else or hire an engineer to help us fix everything. And then we could build projects to help reduce the alert volumes by improving our capabilities. And that's something that we could do. But I think going back to the answer, it's a very difficult one to say you need to do this, this, and this. But I think people need to take more personal responsibility, and they need to be able to communicate their problems more. And businesses need to listen more. I think we just need a little bit more humanity. We need to be able to listen to each other more. We need to be able to talk and understand the problems. It's quite ironic, really, that we're using technology to try and solve security problems, but technology is creating a people problem. It's creating a mental health problem. So there's a bit of kind of paradox here. We're trying to solve one problem. On the other hand, we're creating another problem, and we don't know how to solve this problem, but we know how to solve that problem. So there's this awful paradox that we put ourselves in.
That's so right, paradox. So what are the best ways to reduce workload for SOC professions apart from reducing alarm volume?
So there's a lot of things that can be done, and it's not always about alert volume. I think it's also about general work volume. So I think, let's just say that there's a kind of scale of maturity. There is a scale of maturity. It's called the CMMI scale. But let's just say that you're on level 1. So you've just got everything installed and you're starting to get all these alerts. You want to look at improving the capability of the security operations. You want to start to. Sorry, someone just put a question in the chat. Sorry. This is my neurodiversity now. Now that I was in my flow and I've gone out of it, but yeah, that's my neurodiversity.
It's all right. I got a question.
That's all right. So you want to be able to. God, my brain's gone blank now. Sorry, that's neurodiversity for you. That's your. Let me just have my coffee and.
Yes, have a coffee. It's coffee chat.
Yeah. So imagine that you're on level 1 of that scale. You've built your SOC and you've got that high level of alert volume, and you know got a problem. You want to build what I call a target operating model where you want to go. You're pointing the distance where you're trying to travel to, and the only way that you can do that is by assessing the current capability and the current posture of your security operations center. So understanding what are your problems now and what are you doing well. Then relate that to your target operator model and say, hey, these are the things that we need to do to fix everything, to get better, to achieve better maturity. We're now going to make these into mini kind of agile projects. So the first project is we're going to build more automation into our SIM platform. So a lot of the low-level tasks are automated for us to be able to work more. So there'd be low-level tasks like IP reputation checks, malware analysis, detonation in sandbox, malware analysis, dynamic analysis, all that kind of stuff automated out. So that's going to free people up from time. So instead of them going to go do it manually, it's all done for them. That saves time. There's also going to be an element of, okay, now we need to build more content to improve our detection capability. So we've got low levels, going back to alert volume, driving that down. Then we're going to look at the policies on our solutions. Are they working optimally? Are they too noisy or are they just right? We need to be able to kind of assess the verbosity of the level of detail that they go into and say, is it appropriate? Do we need to alert on that? If not, we don't need to know about it. It's all going back to the kind of threat threshold that the organization has and understanding what they want to protect and what they want to protect them against as well. There's this awful kind of mode of operating that a lot of security operations centers have, where they want to ingest everything that they possibly can and then worry about it later. So they're ingesting 300, 400, 500 gigs of data per day, and then they're not doing anything with it. And when they do stuff with it, it just creates lots of noise. So the approach to ingesting data needs to be flipped on its head. It could be different. First of all, threat model. Understand your product, understand your service, understand what you're trying to protect, and then understand what you're trying to protect it from. Then build your detection based on top of that, as opposed to the other way around. And that's going to create a lot of, that's going to save money as well as save time. And it's going to save that burnout element there as well, because you're going to have more appropriate detection. So there's lots of things that you can do. I've actually got a half-written book about improving security operations, which is sitting on my laptop at the moment. I've not managed to finish it off. It's about 100 odd pages in at the moment. I've still got a few more to write through, but it's 100 A4 pages, so it probably translates to about 150, 200 kind of page. But I'm hoping that that's going to be finished soon when I can actually get round to it when I'm less busy. I think there's a really good question that's just come up. I don't know who's by. It's come up by that LinkedIn user about neurodiverse. I think that's good to answer it because I've been in that kind of situation as well. But
yeah, I say. So speaking of assessing their capabilities and abilities for the whole team, how often do you think do they need to evaluate the whole team to say they can resolve a certain volume of security alerts?
I think let's do this question first because this is a very this is a very important question because one of the biggest problems that I've seen in security operations centers is their ability to communicate. And obviously, where you're working with people from different backgrounds and they may have they may be neurodiverse, it's very difficult to communicate to them. I would say that if they're not comfortable speaking up to themselves, then I would probably argue the question of how did they get the interview in the first place and pass the interview. They must have an ability to communicate if they've be able to pass an interview. An interview is a stressful situation, right? And as a neurodiverse person, I know the stress of what interviews can cause. I know that it can become a very stressful situation. Your ability to communicate, especially if you've got Asperger's syndrome, your ability to communicate can be non-existent if you're in a high pressure situation. And if they can't speak up for themselves, then I would say, well, what's happened? What's caused them to no longer be able to speak? Because they've managed to get the interview. Imagine if it's a 3 or 4 stage interview and they're talking with the SOC manager, then the SOC manager's manager, and so on and so forth. You're speaking to probably high-level executives at some companies to maybe 3 or 4 analysts in a panel stage interview. So for me, it's like, well, in that scenario, it's like, well, something must have happened for them to lose all of their confidence all of a sudden. And I would assess that either the manager's done something to make them uncomfortable or somebody else has done something to make them uncomfortable. And I think there is an element of responsibility on the manager's side to be able to identify that. What if they can only do it over text? Well, then they can type on the keyboard and type their problem to their manager. If their manager needs to be receptive of that. And if they can only do it over text, then the manager should have that responsibility or even have that emotional capability to understand that they have that inability to communicate properly in that kind of situation. Now, I've not ever seen a scenario where it's been a text-based interview. I've personally never seen it, so I can't comment too much on that. It might exist, it might happen quite often and be quite prevalent, but I've never seen it myself, so I'm not even able to comment on whether that's good or whether it's bad or what works or what doesn't work or what the problems are, what are the challenges. I can't comment too much to that.
Yeah, I hope it answers the question. What is my question like? How often do we need to assess their capabilities or abilities for the whole team to make sure that they won't always work overload?
Yeah, so it's quite a hard question because there needs to be an element of understanding the appetite of growth in the business as well as the resources that the business have. So assessing the security operations center is quite an arduous task. It's quite an extensive task that takes quite a while. If anybody's done a SOC assessment, they know that it's a lot of talking. It's a lot of trying to find the answers to problems, and it's trying to find the relevant stakeholders. It's quite a difficult time to be in. So it can take 2 to 3 weeks to complete a full assessment of a security operations center. Unless you've got a small one, then it probably takes only about a week to a couple of days. So you've got to really assess how much resources are going to be used during this assessment. So if it's larger security operations centers, I would say twice a year is good enough. Because the first time you do it, you're going to understand that you have a lot of skeletons in the closet. You have a lot of problems that you need to fix. And the second one is assessing, have you fixed them? Have you improved? And then it's the same one as saying, okay, we've done that second assessment. We know where our new skeletons are or where the old skeletons still are in the closet. We can now go on. And it's just a kind of circular process of assess, fix, that reevaluation constantly. If you're a smaller security operations center, you could probably be a little bit more agile with it. You could do every quarter, you could do an assessment, etc., all that kind of stuff there. So there's lots of elements that you could do there. It really depends on the appetite of the organization, and it depends on how much money they have and how much. Because what we've got to understand is there's somebody that's going to be doing this who normally does a different job. So the security operations manager may do an assessment, but that's going to take them away from their everyday business as usual operations. That takes them away from the field a little bit, so they can take that bird's eye view and look at them, and look at the kind of landscape of security operations and understand what the problems are. So there is that element of, do we need to take that resource away? And if we do, how often should we do that? So I always say twice a year, and if you have the appetite, every quarter.
That sounds very time consuming, but it is very good for them to reduce workload anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember what you said is like, if you're burning through talent, you're burning out people. So I think that would be...
And the manager already got a job to do, so you're only adding more. You've only got more to put on top of that. So you're saying, hey, I know you're doing your job, but you've got this job to do as well. So it's like, well, okay, I try to do assessments little by little. I try to say, right, I'm only going to assess this part this month because I really want to understand it, and then I'm going to assess this part next month. I really want to understand it.
Right. I think linked to the previous question, neurodiverse. It is for those with neurodiverse backgrounds to do text or no camera interviews. It seems like initially they just go in touch with text instead of in person or camera.
Yeah. So that is for those with neurodiverse backgrounds to do text or no camera interviews. So I always tell an organisation before I go to do an interview that I do have, I do have disabilities. I do, I do suffer quite a bit sometimes. Some days I struggle to talk. Some days I can't talk at all. It's very difficult for me to talk. But I will say, and this is going to sound really, really harsh, but sadly, it's just the reality of how businesses and corporate businesses want to run. Is they are probably going to just go for other candidates if they're struggling to. If they need to make loads of special arrangements for people, they're probably just going to say, right, well, that's going to take us too much time and too much resources. We can't fully accommodate for that right now. We haven't got the money to do so. So we need to go ahead and just interview other people. And sorry, but that's just a sad reality of it. And it shouldn't be like that. And I wish it wasn't like that. But organizations, they want the path of least resistance to good talent. And it's always going to be like that. And we see it all the time, especially the entry level. They're going to go for the best of the best people that they can get through the door quickly. And a lot of organizations have limited hiring budgets. And that also goes into their ability to use stuff like ATS systems, their ability to use special interview systems. There's a platform that I really, really love, and I really can't remember the name of it. I've been trying to think of it. But essentially what it does, it's like an interview in a box. You would go on there, you apply for the role, the recruiter will look at your CV and they will click a button and say, hey, yeah, you want to go through. And then they'll give you the challenge. They give you this challenge that you have to do. You give you 24 hours, 48 hours to go do this challenge. And then you get a kind of interview at the end of it. And it was a 2-stage interview. You do the challenge and you do the in-person interview. The in-person interview was just a character check, just to make sure that you're a good fit for the organization. And that was it. It was swift. I love that kind of thing. I think that was a really good way to assess talent. But the problem is when organizations are hiring, they don't normally do that. They normally go for the very traditional methods, and traditional methods aren't neurodiverse friendly. They really aren't. And they have this kind of prevalence where they have a very traditional interview method where they do 3 stages of in-person interviews or 3 stages of virtual interviews, and that's it. There's no other way to assess them. And organizations are going to do that until they have a good enough motive to be able to kind of change that. I would love change, but try telling that to a FTSE 100 business when they're taking their budget's been all taken away all the time. It's a very big problem with lots of different nuances. We can't always point the finger of blame at businesses because they probably want to do it themselves. There's probably loads of people in the organization that want to say, hey, let's do better hiring. And then they say, well, actually, right now we don't have the budget for it, or right now we can't. There's lots of different things out there, and I think I do support this, and I support this a lot. I think that traditional hiring is, well, it's traditional. It doesn't work anymore, and it's not worked for a long time. And I think there's a lot of things that could be better. But the problem is a lot of organizations, they don't keep up with the change. They like to do it the old ways. I'm a big fan of informal interviews. Like, you'll go into an interview and you'll just chat. You just chat for a bit. You get to know each other. You kind of get them comfortable. And then you just start to ask them questions. You don't treat it like an interrogation. I think you just ask them like questions. You just talk about it, just trying to dig into their knowledge. I like that kind of format. But you have a lot of organizations that will put you in front of like 3 or 4 people, and it would be like you're in an interrogation. They would be interrogating. And I think that kind of interview, I think that's quite difficult for a lot of people. Even non-neurodiverse people struggle with that. I went to an interview for an IoT company, and I had to do a PowerPoint presentation in front of about 5 people. So I spent all week creating this PowerPoint presentation, went into the room and done the PowerPoint presentation. And they just stood there. They just sat there, stone cold face, no emotions. Nobody even nodded. So I don't know if I was doing good. Don't know if I was doing bad. I don't know if anybody fell asleep or not. And I thought that was the worst scenario that I've been in. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a case of a company that supports it. I don't think they're doing it intentionally. I don't think that's the premise there. I don't think that they support that. I think that it's a case of that's the environment that they're currently in. And if they need to change their ways, it's going to take them a little bit of time before they can change it. But they have immediate requirements for talent to be in a certain position. So I think we need to have a little bit of be fair to companies and say, okay, there is a challenge. You need to start hiring better. You need to change your ways. Have you got a time frame? Have you got a roadmap for how you're going to do that? I think that's a more of appropriate kind of thing to ask is, do companies that have current problems with hiring have a roadmap to improve their hiring? If they do, brilliant. Tell me more about it. But it's a conversation that can go on forever and ever.
Right. Here's another question from Joe. What is a positive aspect you say for futures as a future of the cyber workforce?
God, positive.
Positive.
What positive aspect do you see for the future of the cyber workforce? God, it's difficult. I've been doing so much reading recently that I realised that the kind of outlook for cybersecurity in the future is actually incredibly negative in terms of the way it's going to look in the future. I think the positive aspect for the future of the cyber workforce is technology is only going to become more prevalent, right? It's only going to become more required, and it's going to become more pertinent for operations in organizations. So it's going to become more embedded, whether we like it or not. So technical security are going to have a bigger seat at the table. It's going to be more prevalent for organizations to understand the appropriateness of cybersecurity. But in the future, there's going to be less roles in cybersecurity, whether we like it or not. And we're starting to see that in the current job market. We're seeing less and less roles go out for like stock analysts, for pen testers. And there is a lot to blame. It's not just the economic downturn, but there's also a lot of other elements at play as well. I went to a future of cybersecurity discussion. Diversity is what we're seeing in cybersecurity. We're already seeing diversity. If we're looking in the future, we're looking at about a year, 2 years time. There's already loads of diversity starting to come through in cybersecurity, and we're starting to see lots of initiatives come up for diversity. I think it's something that's not just the future, but that's now. But in the future, I don't think it's going to be as positive as I think people is. I think it's going to change, right? There's going to be a massive change in required skill set in security. And I think that's obvious when you look at the technology kind of landscape over the past 20 years. It's changed massively. And because of that change, it's impacted the number of roles or the volume of skill set that you need to bring to a role. And I think we're only going to see a repeat of that in the next 10 years. And so for me, based on my predictions, it's not going to be overly positive, but we are going to see a bigger stake in the prevalence of security as it relates to a organization.
This is kind of a very challenging question from my friend Joe. Uh, so, well, just let's start a bit of easy question then. How often do you read academic literature related to security? How do you choose the academic articles, and where do you get it?
Sorry, what was?
How often do you read academic articles related to cybersecurity or just security?
Is this in relation to certifications?
Probably just like for your life habits, I suppose. Like when you want to rate something with cybersecurity, because you also read lots of books and articles. You must have lots of resources to provide any insight, inspiration. That's kind of related to your life habits. Then it's a really easy question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do have a lot of resources, but this is where it becomes very difficult for me to explain why. I use a lot of like research papers to understand what's going on in cybersecurity, because the problem is a lot of these books, especially the likes of CISP, which to me CISP is the lowest form of security, is something that I don't want to use as a reference because a lot of it is incredibly useless and inaccurate. So I want to go to peer-reviewed resources that have been, reviewed by academic bodies that have been studied, that they've been doing lots of research around it. I want to go there, but I also want to look at resources such as business management manuals. So I have a book at the moment. It's called The Personal MBA, and it's all about managing a business and designing and managing a business, right? It's all about passing an MBA. So a lot of people think about where's the kind of intersection there? And that's a lot of people say, well, why? And I said, well, the reason you exist is because a business wants you to exist. A business has a requirement for you to exist. So why didn't you understand how they manage themselves? There's a lot of people don't realize that risk is actually just financial. It's not really that much to do with security. It's financial. It's about business survival. It's about protecting finances. And in the Personal MBA book, there was a bit in there about financial risk. And it says in there, risk can come from any form, whether it be a physical risk to the organization, the information security risk to the organization, whether it be a political risk to the organization. There's all these different things there. And it's understanding where you fit into that picture at a more granular level. And I think that's a really useful resource. I'm trying to think of what other stuff that I've got on my shelf. There's a few good books as well. There's a book by Greg Vandergas called Rethinking InfoSec. That's a really, really good book. It's talking about where the hell we're going wrong. There's also a book by Gary Hibbard, and it's called The Art of Cybersecurity. You probably can't see it because I'm like The Art of Cybersecurity. It's a really, really good book. It's called A Practical Guide on Winning the War on Cybercrime. And it talks about security as it relates to the business. Again, I was going to say it all the time, relates to the business, because that's the reason why we exist. So there's a lot of resources, but I think if you don't have the money to fork out on these books, go on to Google Scholar and start typing in subjects that you want to read more about. You're going to find some really interesting research articles about cybersecurity. And to me, that's a really good inspiration, because you might think, do you know what? Has anybody else thought of this problem? And you go type it into Google Scholar. Yeah, there's a research paper on it. I'll read the research paper. And you think, actually, I'm going to come at this problem at a different angle. What about this? What about that? And then you start going in your own mind about it. That's where I was reading a book on capability development in businesses. So it's not about cybersecurity at all. It's actually about functional requirements and functional improvements in business. And I was thinking, and they started talking about the word effective, and that's where my premise, the effective analyst, has come from. Is come from there. I managed to draw parallels from that book, and that's going to be coming. And then an article coming out tomorrow about that. which I hope people are going to enjoy. But
yeah, very academic.
Oh, I love academic stuff. I've never been to university in my life. I've never really been to a school in my life, but I love academic stuff.
I can't imagine. Well, just be mindful about the time. I think I just have last questions to wrap it up, because I've read the articles you wrote, the theory of SOC success.
Yeah.
Could you use 5 words to describe a qualified SOC profession in their organization? 5 words. Just
5 words to
describe qualified SOC professions in their organization.
So
Or very
5
good
words
SOC,
to.
yes, or very good SOC professions.
Oh, that's very difficult. I'm not very articulate when it comes to very short sentences. That's going to be really difficult. Wow. Okay, that's a challenge. That's like asking me to stay on a diet for more than 2 days. Oh, wow. Okay. Right. A good security operations center should help the business continue to succeed. That's it.
Fantastic.
That's all it should do. And if it doesn't do anything more, if it doesn't do anything less than that, then it's failing.
Concise, but very accurate, I would say.
That's the only thing that I can think of in little amounts of words as possible, because my ability to articulate is just not there.
Yeah, well, SOC is easy. It's not easy to understand, and it's not easy to do.
No, so that actually, brings on to quite a big point, is that SOC is so convoluted now, and it's undergoing an extreme amount of convergence as it relates to other functions. We're starting to see SOC basically expand into a very different landscape to what it was 4 or 5 years ago. We're starting to see SOCs with engineering, vulnerability management, cloud security, all underneath one roof. And even more so, I've seen security operations centers that have a red team and blue team underneath the kind of SOC umbrella. So it's starting to take a big kind of mold at the moment, and it's starting to break that mold and say, hey, it's a very fluent, dynamic environment, and it really depends on what the organization requires and to how it's going to look. So it presents quite a lot of challenges. How are you going to learn all those things? Now, I would say that SOC in itself is a function that requires various different skill sets. And if you gather yourself the right skill set, you find yourself in that role.
It's awesome. So a good SOC isn't about filling bananas into a served floppy drive.
Well, I don't know. I've probably fed a server a banana in a floppy drive before because.
Never heard about it, but it's not very funny. Yeah, I think we pretty much finished our coffee chat today. All the interesting questions. I hope you enjoyed that. It's a really lovely coffee chat, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of challenging questions. Not a lot about SOC, but quite a lot of challenging questions in general. But, yeah.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. Yeah, I saw you drink black coffee, so that's a good habit, actually.
It's not. Do you know what? It's going to surprise you. It's black coffee mixed in with mushroom powder.
Mushroom powder.
Yeah, it's a blend of mushrooms.
Mushroom.
Yeah.
It's a real mushroom.
Yeah, so it's a blend of about 7 different mushrooms. So you've got your lion's mane, your reishi mushrooms, all in there. Helps keep the brain in tip-top shape because it's the only thing that actually keeps me going.
Yeah, that helps a lot for answering challenging questions.
Do you know what? I don't think I did very well in challenging questions, but anything about security operations I can answer. But yeah, the challenging questions, yeah, not so much.
That's great. Always good here. Okay, thank you for attending this coffee chat today. I know you're super busy because writing books, articles, doing lots of volunteer work as well. The master of time management.
Do you know what? I'm not the master of time management. I don't know how I do it myself. So when anyone asks me how do you manage your day, I'm like, I don't.